Get ready with me while I tell you this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal experiences, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. So this happened to me during a time in my life where I had been getting really close to God. I was reading my Bible more, praying more, and weird things had already started happening around me. I've heard of this happening where you start to find faith, and all of a sudden, things, like really weird things, just start happening. Nothing too extreme, but enough that I felt like I was being watched. That night, I had been cleaning my room, like deep cleaning. Everything I owned was thrown onto my bed, and by the time I looked at the clock, it was almost midnight, and I was nowhere near done. I was exhausted, so instead of finishing, I decided I'd just sleep in my mom's room for the night, and I didn't think anything of it. But the second I laid down, something felt weird. Like when the room is too quiet and the air is just heavy. I was facing the foot of the bed when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a tall, dark figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the bed. Not moving, not breathing, just there. I am getting up and I am running. I'm sprinting out of there. Next to it was my mom's dresser with a mirror facing directly toward us. So I did what anyone would do. I looked at the mirror, and then I looked back at the figure. I felt my chest tighten because it wasn't in the mirror. What is that thing that people say that you should not have a mirror facing you or your bed? I know there's a thing that says that there should not be a mirror facing you, facing your bed where you're sleeping. Something about a mirror in a bedroom, or a mirror and a bed, right? The space where it should have been reflected was completely empty. But when I looked at it directly, it was there, clear as day. I remember just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And the longer I looked, the more it started to change. What was once just this shadow slowly started to take on a human form. I don't like this. It grew more detailed, more real. It looked like a man, extremely tall, dressed in a clean, expensive suit. But there was something deeply wrong about him. He was smiling. No. Not a normal smile, not a friendly smile, not a comforting smile. It was sinister. Like he knew something that I didn't. And the more I focused on him, the darker he became. And it wasn't just shadow dark, but like I was looking into space. His body didn't look solid anymore. It looked endless, like a void filled with darkness. Like if I stepped into him, I wouldn't come back. And then he spoke, not loud and not with his mouth, but I heard him in my mind. He told me to come with him. Oh no. That if I joined him, he would give me everything I've ever wanted. My dream life. I remember being so tired and irritated at the time that instead of being terrified, I just told him no. I kept telling him to leave me alone over and over again. But then he started speaking again. And this time in a language I didn't understand. It sounded like he was speaking in tongues. But somehow I still knew exactly what he was saying. And right as that was happening, everything changed. It felt like my mind left my body. What? Like I was pulled somewhere else entirely. And suddenly I wasn't in the bedroom anymore. I was in something like a courtroom. It wasn't a normal courtroom. The room was massive and it was bright, almost overwhelming. And I wasn't alone. There were figures all around me. Angels, rows of them sitting like a jury. At the front of the room was God as the judge, and standing beside me was Jesus. And then I saw him again. The same entity from the bedroom. But now he was on trial. What is happening? Everything happening was being spoken in that same unknown language, but I understood every single word. The angels kept repeating that he had been warned, that he was not supposed to interfere with my life the way he just had. There was no arguing, no confusion. It was just like everything had already been decided. Jesus spoke on my behalf and God agreed, and just like that, it was over. I was back in my body, back in my bed, and the man, the thing at the foot of the bed, was gone completely, like he had never been there at all. And the craziest part What had felt like hours, like I had been gone for so long, was only a couple of minutes. When I checked the time, it was 2, maybe 3 minutes at most. I later talked to a pastor about it, and he told me that moments like that can happen fast, that spiritual experiences, especially ones like that, don't follow normal time. But I've never experienced anything like it again, and honestly, I wouldn't ever want to.
What would you do if you looked out into your backyard late at night and saw your elderly neighbor doing something that didn't make any sense? This is Scare with Jess, and today's story is about someone who said that they looked out into their backyard late at night and saw something that they just can't explain. I used to rent a small house at the end of a quiet street. It was one of those places where nothing much happened. The neighbor behind me was old, like really old, and I never knew their exact age, though I would have guessed late 80s. They lived alone in the house behind mine and mostly kept to themselves. I'd see them now and then bringing in mail or standing on the back step in a robe. We'd wave sometimes, but that was about it. Nothing about them stood out during the day. At night, though, I started hearing things. It began with little sounds outside after midnight. Rustling in the yard, a soft thump here and there. Once or twice I heard what sounded like somebody moving through dry leaves near the fence. I figured a raccoon or a cat or maybe someone's dog. I do live alone, so I'm careful, but I wasn't scared yet. Then one night I heard giggling. That's what finally got me to the window. It was late, a little after 2. I had been half asleep on the couch, and at first I thought the sound was from the TV, except the TV was off. It was coming from outside. It was quiet, like somebody was trying not to laugh too hard. I got up and looked out through the back window, and at first I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My neighbor was in my backyard, crouched low in the grass near the back fence. And their night clothes were hanging loose off them, and they were bent over something on the ground with both hands close in. Their shoulders were moving slightly, and I thought maybe they had fallen. That was honestly my first thought, that maybe they'd wandered over and collapsed, and I was looking at somebody trying to get up. But then I heard chewing. It was slow and wet, and that little giggling sound again. I froze at the window. I still couldn't make out what they were crouched over because the yard was dark except for a little spill of light from my kitchen. I leaned closer to the glass. That was when they turned. There was blood all over their face, down the chin and around the mouth on the front of the night clothes. Their mouth was hanging open. It wasn't smiling, just open, and for a second I thought their eyes looked completely black. I still go back and forth on that because it was dark out and maybe I caught the reflection wrong, but I swear that's what I saw. Just black where the eyes should have been. I dropped straight down under the window. My whole body reacted before my brain did. I was crouched on the kitchen floor with my heart beating so hard it hurt, trying not to make a sound and hoping they hadn't seen me standing there. I stayed there like that for maybe 10 seconds. And then I slowly lifted myself back up and looked out again. The yard was empty. No neighbor and nothing moving. Whatever had been in the grass was gone too. I stood there staring for a second, trying to decide whether I had just scared myself into seeing something stranger than what was really there. Then my front doorbell started ringing. Over and over. Not one ring, not somebody polite at the door. I mean, hard, quick presses, one after another, like whoever was outside had their finger jabbing at it as fast as they could. I ran to the front of the house and checked the peephole. Nobody. I looked through the side window by the door, too, but nobody was on the porch and nobody was in the yard. The bell stopped, and I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I looked out back, expecting to see some sign that would have made the whole thing make sense. A dead animal, or tracks, or maybe some torn up grass, something. There was a dark patch near the fence where my neighbor had been crouched, but I wasn't about to go kneel down in it for a closer look. I stayed on the patio and stared at it like that was somehow better. Around 10 that morning, I saw the neighbor outside in their own yard, normal clothes and carrying a watering can. I watched from my kitchen window while they watered one of those little flower boxes by the back steps. At one point, they looked up and saw me. Then they waved, the same as always. I didn't wave back, and that second night I told myself I was not going to look. That lasted until the same time rolled around and I heard the giggling again. Quieter this time, but closer. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute arguing with myself and then went back to the back window and looked out. My neighbor was already there. Not crouched this time, standing in the yard facing the house, staring straight up at my window like they had been waiting for me to come look. The blood was still on them. It had dried darker down the front of the nightclothes, but there was fresh blood around the mouth, enough that I could see it even from inside my house. In the eyes, I still can't swear to it fully, I wish I could, because that would almost be easier than sitting in the uncertainty. And from where I stood in that dark, they looked black again. No shine and no whites, just completely black. And I couldn't move. Then they lifted one hand and slowly waved. Not a normal wave either, stiff and just wrong looking. I backed away from the window, and I did not go near the front of the house that time. I just locked the back door and then checked every other door and window twice. I sat in my bedroom with the lamp on until daylight, and the next morning there was a note taped to my front door. Folded once, but smears of blood across the outside. I stared at it for a while before touching it. Inside, in shaky handwriting, it said, "Mind your business." I moved out 2 weeks later. I drove by that street once after dark, maybe a month after I left. I don't even know why. It was just morbid curiosity, I guess. And the house was still there. Porch light on, neighbor's yard quiet. Then I looked in the rear view and saw somebody standing at the edge of the old backyard, just past the fence line. And even from that distance, I could tell they were waving. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Stories like this are why I'm always paranoid about nighttime deliveries. So this 20-year-old girl was a delivery driver for a popular pizza spot. She was originally working late morning, mid-afternoon shift, but eventually got moved to the night shift. She said she didn't want this shift because you never know when you're delivering late at night if people actually want pizza or have other intentions. I'm not gonna lie, I don't blame her. As a woman who does DoorDash from time to time, once the sun goes down, I'm going home. Unfortunately, her boss didn't care and told her if she didn't work the night shift, she was fired. Boo, L-boss. Unfortunately, she wasn't in a place to be out of a job, which I completely understand. She said the first month of the shift went smooth until she had to deliver to a house that was just on the edge of the delivery range. So she puts it in her GPS and it's in like a suburban part of the city. When she arrives, it's like 11 p.m. It's quiet, decently lit, and like a bunch of townhouses. But the house she was delivering to was a duplex. She rings the doorbell, waits for 30 seconds, no answer. She rings it again, waits another 30 seconds, and still no answer. I'm not gonna lie. If I ring the doorbell, you really got 15 seconds to come get this pizza before I go home. Especially at night. Matter of fact, 10. She's standing there and she's getting nervous that something's about to go down, but then finally a man opens the door. She said he looks like he's in his late 40s. He's tall and real skinny. She's like, "Hey, I'm here to deliver your pizza." And he's just staring at her. So she's like, you good? And he like, "Yeah, my bad. Like, I just got off work not too long ago, so I'm just zoning out." So she like, cool. She hands him the pizza. He hands her the money. As she's counting the change, he's like, "You're really beautiful. You know that?" So she doesn't think that deep into it. She says thank you, gives him the change, says goodnight, heads back to the whip. A few days later, she got a delivery for the same address. She heads over around the same time, and when she got there, this time he opened the door fast, and he's like, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" You knew it was gonna be me. And why are you so happy to see me? Ain't nobody ever wanted pizza this bad. I ain't gonna lie, it's been times where I wanted the pizza that bad. I have been really excited to see the delivery man sometimes. So she's just making conversation. She's like, "Man, I'm good. I'm just tired, ready to get off work." And he's like, "Yeah, I know the feeling." So he pulls out his wallet, and as he's counting the money, he asks her what her name is. And she tells him. Now, I don't think that's crazy, but maybe with all the circumstances, like, it wasn't the best idea to tell him your name, but also, like, y'all just kind of chopping it up, making conversation. I don't know. So as she's counting his change, he's like, can I get your number? No. That would have been my first response. Absolutely not. She's thinking in her head, like, I don't even know this guy. Like, I've delivered pizza to him twice. Like, I don't know you, you don't know me. And he says, I would love to get to know somebody as gorgeous as you. Yeah, I bet you would, buddy. But the answer is no. She also says that, like, she looks younger than what she actually is, and that most people think she's like 15. So she's like, I hope he doesn't think I'm that young and is trying to flirt with me. Maybe he knows I'm of legal age limit because I'm delivering pizza, maybe. I don't know. So she says she just kind of stands there awkwardly, and then she's like, sorry, I have a boyfriend. And he don't like that. He gets upset. He's like, oh, okay, I see. So she gives him his change. She says goodnight, and he doesn't say anything back. He watches her walk to her car. She gets in, and she's like, she's starting to get creepy vibes from him. When she gets back to the restaurant, she's even telling her coworkers, like, oh, I don't really want to deliver this nigga no more. Like, you're a little weird. And her boss had her to be like, yeah, I don't believe you. You're making it up. You want sympathy because you're working the night shift. Try again. Fuck you. So a week later, she's working the night shift again, and she gets a delivery for the same house. She says this is when shit hits the fan. She arrives to the house at 10:30, and she said driving up from the street, it looks like there are no lights on at the house. So she parks, she gets out the car, and she's walking up to the door with the pizza, and before she can even ring the doorbell, he's opening the door. Hello. And so she jumps back because she's startled, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I saw you pull up. I figured I'd just come open the door so you didn't have to ring the doorbell. You were waiting on me. Also, he's wearing a suit. So she's a little anxious because, like we said before, there are no lights on in the house. So she's like, he was just sitting there waiting on me, sitting in the dark. That's wee woo. That's a red flag. I would have threw the pizza and ran. Matter of fact, fire me. You just gonna have to let me go. You just gonna have to let me go because what is going on here? So he asked her, do you like my suit? So she just kind of like nervously laughed, and she's like, yeah. And he's like, well, come on a date with me tonight. So she reiterates again, I have a boyfriend. Y'all, this man laughs. He gets close to her and says, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl. I heard that verbiage, how a real man treats a girl. So you know she's young. You probably think she's younger than what she actually is. So you creeped out on so many levels. So y'all, he grabs the pizza box, tosses it to the side, and grabs her arm. So at this point, she is terrified and trying not to cry. Understandably so. She's like, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date. And he's like, I don't care. Get inside now. We're going to have a good time. And he starts trying to pull her inside of the house. So she's resisting as hard as she can. After they're struggling back and forth, he lets go and he reaches in his pocket and pulls out a knife. So she uses her free arm to punch him in the stomach. I know that's right. This stuns him for a second. He loosens his grip and she takes off towards her car. She's trying to get in the car. He done caught up with her. He's pulling her out of the car. He's still holding the knife and he's like, why are you making this so difficult? She grabs a soda bottle out of her cup holder and throws it at him. It hits him in the head and he ends up letting her go. She slams the car door and y'all, he jumps on the hood of the car. He is banging on her windshield and scratching it with the knife. So she starts backing up and he is holding on for dear life. He is banging on the hood, yelling at her to stop the car. She does not. She had to swerve and bend a corner, but eventually he fell off the hood. And when he did, she hit that gas and took off. In a panic state, she just like kept driving blocks, like turning, making turn after turn just to make sure she wasn't being followed till she finally got to a red light and stopped. And she said as soon as she stopped, she was just crying and shaking. I can only imagine how scary that was because he clearly had sinister intentions. Like he wasn't inviting her in just for the vibes. He was planning on hurting her. So she finally gets the energy to drive back to her job. When she gets there, as soon as she walks in, they know something is wrong. So she breaks down. She's telling all her coworkers about what happened. And she said even her boss surprised her and like apologized to her and was like, I am so sorry for putting you on a night shift. He took her into the office, gave her a phone and had her call the cops. Yeah, boss, while you was being a stinking doodlehead, but police came, they took pictures of her scratches, her bruises. They took pictures of all the scratches on her car. Really just got any information that they could to help deal with the situation. One of her coworkers followed her home and she was able to go to sleep that night, but the next day she did quit her job. I'm not mad at that at all. 2 days later, she finds out that the duplex was owned by the crazy man's brother, and him and his wife lived on the right side while he lived on the left side. Apparently, he had been in and out of jail. At first, it was for robberies and assault, but then eventually it was for sex crimes. He had just been released from jail 5 months before this for having sex with a minor. When the police went to the house, he was gone. They said he had ran off and they didn't know where he went, but they insisted that they were going to find him. And they did find him. Not alive, though. 2 months after this happened, the police called her with an update. Apparently, the guy had fled to another city and was trying to kidnap a teenager off of the street. There was somebody looking out of the window and they called the cops. When the police got there, they caught him trying to force the girl into his car. He manages to flee, and so the police start chasing him. During this chase, he runs a red light in a busy area and a van slams straight into the side of his car. The driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, but he succumbed to his injuries before the ambulance even got there. She says when she finds that out, she never wishes death on anybody, but she was so relieved that nobody else would have to get hurt and that she wouldn't have to, be out here with her head on the swivel wondering if he was coming back. I too never wish death on anybody, but some of y'all gotta go. I am so glad that she made it out of this situation safely because there are so many people that don't. Y'all, please be safe out there.
Welcome back to another episode of Tea After Midnight. Just a little series where we have some tea to keep it nice and classy, but I also tell you scary stories. So grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you another scary story. Because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. This story comes from Adriana. The events that happen in this story are 100% true and will always stick with me. My name is Adriana, and while this story doesn't take place in the Appalachian Mountains, I still have nightmares because I really don't know what I encountered and what I brought home with me. When I was about 15, I found myself hanging around people I probably shouldn't have. I really didn't fit in with the kids at my school, but I had a few friends that had already graduated, and I would hang out with them after school. One of the friends I would spend a lot of time with, her name was Megan. She was always really kind to me, but would take me to other people's houses that were, let's just say, not the best of influences. I won't get into too much detail on that portion of things, but I will say they didn't always follow the law. And I really shouldn't have gone over there, but I just wanted to fit in. One Friday after school, Megan picked me up from my house and took me over to one of her other friends' houses. As soon as I walked in, there were 6 other people there, none of which I knew. I'm a pretty shy person, so Megan grabbed my hand and said, "Hey everyone, this is Adriana." Everyone just looked at me like I shouldn't be there, which at the end of the day was true. I just sat on the couch for a little while minding my business when Megan's other friend comes out of the back of the house into the living room with a Ouija board and sat it on the coffee table in front of me. He looked at me and said, "Have you ever used one of these before?" I just sat there and said no. The only time I've ever seen one of these was in a movie, but I've never used one and really didn't have any fascination in using it. Megan sat next to me and she looked like she was really excited, so I didn't want to ruin her fun. I sat up on the edge of the couch and leaned in towards the board. That's when Megan placed her fingers on the planchette and told me to put my fingers next to hers. Around in circles we went as she asked different questions. I started to get really scared as this type of thing has always unsettled me, but Megan acted like she had done this a lot. She asked if there were any spirits there with us, and the planchette practically shot across the board to yes. I looked at her and said, "Megan, are you moving the piece?" She turned and looked at me, but her eyes seemed different. A lot different. She had this expression of anger on her face and her eyes looked black. I've never seen someone's eyes look that dark before. Then she said, "Just wait." Chills instantly ran down my body and I took my fingers off of the planchette. She grabbed my hand and tried to place it back on the piece, but I yanked away my hand and started heading for the door. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I wasn't going to stick around and find out. My house was only a few blocks away, so I just started walking home. I had gotten a good distance away from the house when I hear a car approaching. Then I hear Megan's voice say, "Adriana, get in the car, I'll take you home." I told her, "No thanks, I'm good, I'll just walk." That's when Megan replied the eeriest thing I have ever heard. "I wouldn't walk alone by myself at night if I were you. There are things lurking in the shadows just waiting for you, and she said she would find you." I stopped and looked at her and said, "Who is she?" Megan smiled and drove off. I was feeling a mix of emotions at this point. Mad at Megan for putting me in that situation and leaving me by myself, but also terrified that I was by myself outside in the dark. I finally made it back to my house and went straight to my room. I sat on my bed just frustrated with everything that happened that night. I decided to go to bed and deal with the fallout tomorrow. I don't usually have a hard time falling or staying asleep, but what Megan had said earlier, she said she will find you, had me tossing and turning. I used to have an analog clock on my nightstand, and I found myself staring at it in the middle of the night, 3:16 a.m. to be exact. I was lying there trying to fall asleep, but I heard a noise coming from my closet. It sounded like scratching. I sat up and turned on my lamp and crept over to the closet and slowly opened the door. The scratching stopped. I turn around to head back to bed, and the light bulb in my lamp goes out. I flipped the bedroom light switch on and looked at the lamp. That's when I see the cord to the lamp is out of the wall plug. I went downstairs and laid on the couch that night because it just felt heavy in my room. Now it was about 3:30 when I was lying on the couch, and I had the TV going just for a little distraction. I was starting to feel my eyes getting heavy, so I rolled over to try and fall asleep. As soon as I closed my eyes, the TV turned off. This being the second time something turned off, I didn't think it was a coincidence. I laid there for a few seconds when I heard something whisper my name. I started screaming and my dad ran down the stairs to check on me. I told him that I heard something whispering my name, and he told me to go upstairs and get into my bed. I told him about the scratching in the lamp, and he told me to go get in his bed and sleep with my mom. My dad slept on the couch that night, and my mom laid there hugging me until I fell asleep. All of that was enough to scare me out of my mind, but the next morning I went downstairs where my dad was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. He asked me what happened the night before, and I told him everything, beginning with the Ouija board and ending with the TV turning off. He then tells me that when I went upstairs, he looked at the TV to see why it had turned off. He told me the cord to the TV was unplugged from the wall plug. But it gets worse. He said he plugged it back in and the show I was watching came back on, so he sat there and watched a little bit before he laid down for bed. And once he was done watching it, he used the remote to turn off the TV, and when he turned it off, there was a woman in a white gown standing behind him in the reflection of the TV. But when he turned around, there wasn't anything there. My dad is not the type to get spooked about anything, but this had him really unsettled. Once my mom came downstairs, she and my dad told me to take them to my room so they could look in my closet. My mom moved my clothes to one side of the closet and told my dad to look inside. They both stood there looking at something and then looked at each other with concern. I stepped behind them so I could take a look as well, and in my closet there were 3 scratch marks in the drywall of my closet. My dad asked if I did it, to which I replied, absolutely not. The next few months we had random things happen, like lights turning off and on, doors being open while we were in the room, and even one night my mom and dad heard banging coming from upstairs. Thinking it was me, my dad called my name and asked if I was upstairs. That's when I came from the living room and said, "Dad, that wasn't me." He looked everywhere upstairs, but there was no one there. A few months later, my family and I moved to a new house on the other side of town. It took a while for that house to sell, but eventually it did. I'm not sure what I brought home that night, and I'm not sure who the woman was, but I can only think that maybe the woman Megan was talking about was the woman who did all of those things in that house. So for starters, I just want to say shame on Megan for putting you in that situation. You were 15 and clearly you were uncomfortable being there, but then to top it off, they bring out a Ouija board. And every time the word Ouija board is in a story, I just know it's going to end badly. But I am focused on what Megan told you when you were leaving about she will find you. Who is she? So fast forward, you're at home, you're on your bed, laying there trying to fall asleep, and you hear scratching in the closet. Turn on the lamp, try to figure it out, can't find anything, and then the lamp goes out. No. Immediately I would have woken up my parents because no. But then to find out that the lamp was physically unplugged, that's what freaks me out. But what freaks me out even more is going downstairs, the TV turning off, and something whispered your name. I have chills all over. But it gets worse, like you said. Your dad comes down there and tells you to go upstairs. He's down there watching TV, and when he turns off the television, there's a woman in a white nightgown standing behind him? Absolutely not. I'd have packed my whole family up right then, and we'd have left. But then to top it all off, the cherry on top of the cake is the claw marks that you found in your closet. Absolutely not. Pack it up, we're done. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. If you have any personal scary stories you want to share, I would love to read them. You can send them to my email. The email's on the screen right here, or the email in the caption of this video. But as always, you guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. I love you. I hope you have the best night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Axe in hand, the vibe is set, and once I start, don't eat too much because you gotta stay fine. But come on, bestie is. Oh yeah. Hi, bestie. I missed you. I done caught you at nighttime, huh? I don't care if it's night. Go get a snack or some water. Get something. For the others, get your gardening essentials. All right. So for the sake of the story, let's call this girl Vivian. Vivian, qui m'appelle comme ça. Sorry, I just had to. This was an experience that Vivian had that till this day she doesn't understand, so she wanted to share it with me, and I thought I'd share it with y'all. So one night, Vivian went to sleep like everything was normal, nothing was wrong. She just went to sleep. And when she went to sleep, she had a dream. This is kind of a short story, but she had a dream that she was in her home, right? She had a dream that she was in her living room sitting on her couch, except when she turned over to the clock, it was the same time she went to sleep. And when she looked at her phone in the dream, it was the same date as she went to sleep. All of a sudden, she started to hear so many different voices. I know what you're thinking, like voices, like she might be hearing, No, these voices felt like people she knew, right? So something told her to go outside, and so she decided to go outside. Mind you, she's still dreaming. She decided to walk outside of her home, and when she got out there, it was as if she can see everyone's dream. Like, the moment she got outside, she looked up at the sky, and above each person's house, it's like she can see what they're dreaming about. And immediately when she realized that, she also realized that she was dreaming. And she said that it was kind of like the most beautiful yet terrifying thing that she had ever experienced. And so she decided to walk down the street to kind of peep at everybody's dream. And as she's walking down the street, she's literally watching people's dreams. And certain dreams, she stood there because they were getting interesting. It was like a TV show. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that when she walked out her house, she turned to face her own house. She didn't see her own dream, but she was seeing the dreams that her family was having, right? And then she decided to take the walk and everything and look at everybody else's dream. Now, the only thing is that she noticed that most people were having regular dreams. However, some people's dreams were darkly blurry. It was blur, but a dark blur, and it was all mumble jumbled up. And remember how I told you she was hearing voices? She wasn't hearing voices, she was hearing people's dreams. And so, but with the people that are blurry, she can't really hear anything. It just sounds jumbled up. And she decided to take a tour around her block, look at everybody's dream, and eventually she said she felt like it was time for her to go back home. She felt it, and so she walked back home, and when she got in the house, she woke up. Now, when she woke up, right, normally when you go to sleep, you wake up, you're well rested. When she woke up, she felt like she was 10 times more tired than when she went to sleep. And she actually had to take the next 2 days to rest because no matter how hard she tried to get up and go on about her day, she was exhausted. And to confirm that she wasn't crazy, remember how I told you she was looking at her family's dreams? She asked her family what they were dreaming about. And exactly what she was seeing is what they were dreaming about. If anything, some of them couldn't even really remember part of the dreams. Like, they remember bits and pieces, but she saw the dream and she was actually telling them and reminding them. And they were like, how the fuck do you know what I was dreaming about? And she was trying to explain to them the experience, but not saying they weren't listening to her and they weren't taking her serious, but it was just kind of like they seemed more scared of her, you know? But yeah, Vivian only had that happen once to her in her whole life. Until this day, she doesn't know what that means. It's late night. I didn't, post any story times for y'all today. And I thought I'd post this. It's very short. So let me know what y'all think it means in the comments. Because she will be looking. She's still looking for answers till this day. I can't quite give an answer yet. Like, I would have to do research first because that's a first. But yeah, y'all, it's very short, but it's late. And your girl gotta go to sleep very soon. But yeah, don't forget to let me know if you did have a snack, Don't forget to go over to my YouTube channel and watch my stories in long form. Don't forget to grab your ebook. Okay, I love you. Good night. Bye.
My grandfather quit the lighthouse service was the year Lake Michigan froze black instead of white. That's what he told me on the night he died. This is Nick's allegedly true submission to Spooky Scary Storytime, and he says that his grandfather never told a lie in his life, and if this was a tall tale, he doesn't know why he would pick his deathbed to do it. He says his grandfather spent 53 years refusing to talk about the winter that he took a temporary assistant job at South Manitou Island Lighthouse, which is a real lighthouse about 20 miles off the coast of Michigan. Worked this job at a time before radar became reliable and before modern navigation systems, and when lighthouse keepers were really the difference between sailors making it safely to shore or getting lost at sea in the dark. But Nick says his grandfather started the story by calling him over and telling him, people forget how dangerous Lake Michigan truly is. Storms and the water don't behave like a normal lake there. Storm waves can rise 20 feet and behave in strange patterns, which old sailors used to call the Three Sisters, where one massive wave is followed by two bigger ones, which can capsize almost any boat. Hundreds of ships lie at the bottom of Lake Michigan, and because of the water temperature at certain depths, bodies can be preserved for decades. And because of this, certain old sailors believe that the lake was conscious and that it was alive, and that if it wanted something, it kept it. Grandfather said, I believe this too. He was 19 in 1934 when he took the temporary assistant lighthouse keeper position after the previous assistant keeper had disappeared. Officially, he had rowed out during a storm to secure a buoy line and never returned, but unofficially, he had been hearing singing for weeks. His grandfather said he had laughed at this rumor when he first arrived, and he described the lighthouse as being beautiful. It was a glowing white tower. It still stands, and beside it stands the keeper's quarters, and it's against the edge of water with a dense forest around it. He spoke on the silence and said it was so quiet that winter that you could hear the cracks when the ice shifted. He worked under a lighthouse keeper named Ernest Hustler, who is documented in service logs, and the first night he arrived, Hustler told him that there are rules in the lighthouse. Of course, Nick's grandfather expected this, but he didn't expect him to tell him, yeah, if you hear knocking after midnight, don't answer the door. His grandfather laughed at this, assuming he was pulling his leg, but Hustler continued, and he said, and if you see a woman on the shoreline, leave her there. His tone did not suggest he was joking, so Nick's grandfather didn't say anything, and then he said, do you understand me, boy? And Nick's grandfather nodded, even though he did not. And for 3 weeks, nothing happened. The work was hard but predictable, and for weeks they tended the Fresnel lens in the middle of the night, and the light swept over the lake in long and calm intervals. During storms, the tower shook hard enough to wake them, but he said the isolation was worse than anything else out there. They were completely alone. Some nights they did see ships passing in the night, other nights there was nothing at all. And then came February 2nd, 1934. Storm rolled in from the northwest with almost no warning, and the Coast Guard logs actually did record gale conditions that week, though Nick's grandfather insisted that the weather reports didn't accurately describe how the lake sounded that night. He said that the snow was coming down sideways white. He said by dusk, the lake had vanished entirely behind a curtain of ice and sleet, and near midnight someone began pounding on the lighthouse door. 3 distinct knocks, slow and heavy, and Hustler went pale immediately and grabbed Nick's grandfather's wrist and said, don't. Knocking came again, and a woman's voice drifted through the storm, and it said, please. And Nick's grandfather said he had never heard anything so desperate in his life. He was begging to be let in, and Hustler refused to answer the door. He said, that ain't a woman. But Nick's grandfather was 19 and stubborn and believed that old men became superstitious from loneliness. He pulled his hand free and opened the door, and a young woman who was very pale and thin collapsed across the threshold, and she was wearing no gloves and no coat, just a thin white dress. She was already blue from the cold, and he picked her up and he carried her across the threshold and put her near the fire. And he said that he noticed that there were no footprints outside, but assumed that the snow was coming down so hard that it had already covered her tracks. Nick's grandfather said she weighed almost nothing, and meanwhile Hutzler would not touch her, wouldn't even look in her direction, and he just said, "Send her back." Nick's grandfather ignored him, assuming that her family's boat had gone down and that she had washed ashore. There were always explanations for things like this happening. After an hour of laying by the fire, color slowly started returning to her face, and he described her as being beautiful in an old-fashioned way. She had long dark hair, she had strange gray eyes, and though color had returned to her cheeks, her skin was like that of porcelain. And when she opened her eyes, she looked at Nick's grandfather and said, "Did you call me here?" And he thought she was delirious. He said no. She smiled faintly and then said, "You will," and then fell back asleep. After she said this, Hutzler removed himself from the room and locked himself inside his quarters and did not come out until after dawn. Meanwhile, Nick's grandfather stayed by the woman while the storm raged on outside. At some point just before dawn, he began to hear singing, not from inside, but from somewhere outside in the blizzard, coming from the direction of the lake. He climbed the tower stairs and looked through the windows, assuming that more people had been washed ashore and were stranded by the storm. He scraped a lantern room window clear and saw dozens of figures moving across the ice. They appeared to be women, but they crawled across the ice with impossible smoothness that he thought was strange considering the conditions outside. And they had long black hair trailing behind them, but they moved in such a way that he was like, these can't be women, these are seals. But there's no seals in Lake Michigan. But they were moving too fast to be human. But as they approached the lighthouse, he realized they were women. All of them were staring at the lighthouse, and then he said they all began singing in the same note, and the tower was vibrating, the glass was vibrating, the entire tower hummed, and downstairs he started to hear the woman by the fire, but she was speaking, and it wasn't in English, it was something older. He went downstairs and found her standing barefoot beside the door, and water pooled below her even though she had been dry for hours at this point. Behind her, he saw Hutzler, who had come out of his quarters with the Bible and was praying loudly over her. Said the woman opened her mouth and smiled at him, and that's when he noticed her teeth, which were tiny and sharp and way too many to be human. And she said, "Are you going to come with me?" At that point, they heard something scrape the top of the lighthouse, and he didn't know what it was, but Hutzler grabbed a fireplace poker and he started screaming to shut off the lighthouse lantern. At the time, lighthouse folklore included all sorts of strange beliefs about the lighthouse lanterns attracting more than ships. Taylor spoke of dead crews appearing offshore and strange blue lights moving across the water, and Nick's grandfather never believed any of it until that night. He climbed the tower stairs with Hutzler while the woman remained downstairs, and as they neared the top, the singing grew louder, and when they looked out, they saw hundreds of pale figures surrounding the island around the lighthouse. This time, they were completely still, and they were watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the frozen lake, and they were waiting for the dark between rotations to move. Hutzler shattered the lantern with the fireplace poker, and the light died instantly, and at the same time, every voice outside stopped at once. Then came the final sound from below them, which was the sound of the front door opening, but by the time they reached downstairs, the woman was gone and the storm had ended. Outside, it was dawn. The sky was light blue, and across the snow, there was not a single footprint, just one long mark that looked like something had been dragged back out to the water. Nick's grandfather quit the lighthouse service that morning, and he was afraid of the lake after that. He never returned to another lighthouse, and Nick's grandmother even told him that he refused to even eat fish from Lake Michigan. He wouldn't even look in the direction of water after dark. And Nick says what's interesting is there are actually entries missing from the Coast Guard's logs from that winter. There are entire nights torn clean from the record book, and officially nothing unusual happened there on February 2nd, 1934. Records indicate that it was just another winter on the lake and just another temporary assistant lighthouse keeper who resigned unexpectedly. I asked Nick, I said, "Did you ask him any questions?" And Nick said, "Well, I asked him if he thought they were mermaids," and he grabbed my wrist and he said no. He said, "I think they're what the lake makes from the people it decides it wants to keep."
So apparently this happened to this girl 10 years ago, and she's still trying to think of an explanation as to why. Now, when I listened to this story, I was like, but I'm gonna wait till the end to tell you what I'm thinking, just to see if it's the same thing that you're thinking. Lock in, me and you right here. So at the time, she was working at a taco stand, and usually they would leave work around 3 or 4 in the morning. So basically, she had to walk home after that, and the areas that she had to walk through were a little scary. She says that there was a lot of abandoned houses, some streets didn't even have light. So after closing up, she says that her coworker insisted on walking her home because he knew how late it was and it was a little scary. They started walking, and they had barely hit one of the corners when they noticed noticed that there was a dog walking with them now. She said the dog was like really short and cute and fluffy, and it just didn't seem harmful. She was very familiar with the street dogs because sometimes she would feed them from time to time, but she said that she had never seen this little dog before. She noticed how the dog looked at them for a few seconds and then started walking in front of them. She thought to herself that maybe the dog was just gonna walk with them for a little bit, but then she noticed something really weird. The more they walked towards her house, it was almost as if the dog knew where they were going, because again, the dog was walking in front of them and not behind them. The dog would even go towards the corner that they were gonna have to take, and it was so weird because as they would advance, they started noticing that a lot more dogs were joining in on their walk. At first, it was 2 dogs, then 5, and then so many just surrounding them. She noticed how some of the dogs were coming from like dark places, some of them were coming out from underneath cars. She also noticed another detail, and that on their walk, these dogs would start barking at them. But then that little fluffy dog that had joined them in the beginning would go up to those dogs, wouldn't growl at them, like it wasn't like they were gonna fight. It was almost as if the dog was communicating something to them, and by the time they would walk past them, the dogs would join in on the walk. So obviously after noticing that, she said that she started to get a little nervous. She would also turn to look at her coworker, and he looked so uncomfortable that she would notice that he would also look behind them because there were so many dogs just around them. So another weird thing happened a few blocks after all of this. There was really big dogs in that street, and she noticed that those dogs were growling and barking at her coworker. It was so bad that she could see like the dog's teeth as they're growling at the coworker, and he got so scared that he actually grabbed her by the shoulder. When he did that, these dogs just got a lot worse. They started barking and growling even more than they were before, and when he let go of her is when they stopped growling and barking at him altogether. At this point, she was so scared, and obviously her coworker was so scared. They started walking just a little bit faster, and that little fluffy small dog that had joined them in the beginning was still ahead of them, walking towards the direction of her house. She explains how this little fluffy dog would even run like further. He would lay on the street and wait for them to get to where he's at. He knew where they were going, and the other dogs also started joining him when they would run a little further, lay on the street, and then start walking again when they would catch up to them. She said that it got to the point where she started counting the dogs. She counted up to 40 and she wasn't done. That is how many dogs were surrounding them in their walk. She said they were big, small, short, skinny, fluffy, like all these dogs were just there with them. She explains that none of the dogs ever growled at her, barked at her, or made her feel like she should be scared of them. However, the situation itself was just too weird for her. When they finally got to the front of her house, she says that her coworker literally said goodbye and left almost running away from her. She could tell that he was so freaked out and so scared, but she says that even after this, the weirdest thing also happened for her. None of the dogs followed him. All of the dogs, as soon as she got to her house, started going to different streets. They all started going back to wherever they belonged to, and none of them actually walked her coworker home. Basically, all the dogs went back to where they belonged, and she said that the only one still with her was that little fluffy dog from the beginning of their walk. This dog stayed with her, walked up the stairs to her door with her. When she opened the front door of her house, she said that the little dog sat down, almost like he just wanted to see her walk in, like almost like he wanted to make sure that she would get home safe. When she was about to walk in, she decided to turn around and say thank you to the dog because she just felt like the dog really wanted to protect her. And after she says thank you, she said that the dog stayed there for a few seconds and then turned around and started walking away from her house. She says that it's been 10 years and she never saw this little fluffy dog again, but she feels that something was going to happen to her that night. She strongly feels like those dogs really protected her that night. Now lock in with me. Lock in with me, because this is the only thing that I thought about this entire fucking story. Her coworker, yes or no? Yes or no? I feel like he was gonna do something to her. Why were the dogs growling at him, barking at him, showing their teeth, and then when he got scared and like grabbed her by the shoulder because of how scared he was, they went even crazier until he let her go. They also didn't walk him home. I feel like they were there to make sure he didn't come back, right? Or am I crazy? Am I crazy? I don't know. That's all I could think about. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Let's talk about another haunted doll. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about spooky scary stuff, and I have an email where anyone finds a page can send me their ghost stories. And let me tell you, stories about haunted dolls are my all-time favorite, and I cover them all the time. So let's get into it. This story comes from somebody named Angel, who says that her and her family lived in a haunted house when she was around 6 years old. Now, for context purposes, this house was dirt cheap for rent, which was unusual because this was a really nice neighborhood. It's also important to note that everybody in the house would go to bed at around 9 p.m. every night, but her dad in particular worked night shift, which meant he was getting home and everyone was asleep. That is important to the story. Now, this initial haunting started when Angel was playing in her room around 9 p.m. Her bedroom had a clear view of the backyard, and all of a sudden she looks up while she's playing with her dolls to see a little girl swinging back and forth on her swing set. Now, something was clicking in her head like, that person is not real. Angel tells her mom about it, and her mom says, you're probably just tired and you were just seeing things. A couple days later, Angel's dad gets home, and I guess this feeling had been happening for a long time, like since they had lived there. But Angel's dad would come home after night shift and feel like there was a woman and child sitting on the corner of the couch in a very specific position in the living room, the same spot every single time. And it was such a heavy feeling, like they were absolutely without a doubt sitting there, but there was never anybody physically there. And Angel's dad specifically remembers once seeing these two people. Out of the corner of his eye, he turns and there's still no one there. Obviously, he thought it was just him being exhausted and working night shift, so he just kind of brushed it off and was like, my mind is playing tricks on me. So he just completely brushed it off. Until one day, Angel's mom walked outside to do something, and the neighbor caught her and was like, hey, I didn't know that anybody was living there. She goes, yeah, we've been living here for a couple months. And the neighbor immediately jumps to, do you know what happened in that house? And Angel's family was completely oblivious to anything that had gone on in the house prior to them moving in. So mom says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. The neighbor just looks at her and says, you should probably research it. Angel's mom goes inside, researches it, and discovers that there was this horrific crime involving a mother and child and the father in this home. I'm not going to talk about details because your imagination can probably fill in the blanks on why the mom and the child are still there. But it is important to note that in all of these articles, they specifically said where the mother and daughter had been found deceased. And it was exactly where Angel's dad had been seeing these two apparitions, these two spirits. And that was in the living room where the couch was now. And that is the day that they found out why their rent was so cheap. I love the way the story ends because immediately at the end of this email, it says, once my parents had figured that out, we moved out almost immediately. You know what? Good for them for making that decision because I would have probably done the same. Even if it was dirt cheap, I don't think I could live with a bunch of spirits, especially if they were like not physically or traditionally haunting me, but like out of the corner of my eye kind of thing. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
What would you do if the kid you were babysitting started acting so strange at night that you were even scared to go near his room? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a girl who said that the kid she babysat was perfectly normal during the day and something entirely else after dark. I was 17 when this happened. I babysat all the time back then because it was easy money, and my aunt knew basically every family in town, so I got asked to help out a lot. This was for a couple I didn't know well, but it was a nice house, and they had one little boy, 6 years old, and I'll call him Noah. When I got there the first night, the mom was in a hurry, but in a tense way. She wasn't rude, she was just very distracted. And while she was showing me where snacks were and where the number list was, Noah was standing in the hallway behind her, looking at me. Just staring, not in a shy way. And before they left, his mom said one thing that stuck with me even then. She said, if he talks in his sleep, don't answer from the hallway. It makes it worse. I thought she meant nightmares, and I said, okay. The first hour was normal. We watched a movie, had popcorn, brushed his teeth, and got ready for bed. He was actually very sweet. He was quieter than most kids, but not strange. I tucked him in and went downstairs. Around maybe 10:30, I heard him laughing upstairs. Not giggling, full laughing. It startled me because I figured he'd be asleep by then, and I went up and his room was dark except for the nightlight. He was in bed and his eyes were closed, still laughing. Then he stopped and said in a voice that did not sound sleepy at all, She can hear us on the stairs. I froze. I asked if he was awake, and he didn't answer. I went in, checked under the bed like an idiot, checked the closet, looked behind everything, and nothing was there. Noah still had his eyes closed, and I backed out and shut the door. I should have left then. I know that now. But I needed the money and I wanted a normal explanation, so I kept babysitting there. And it got worse every single time. On the second night, I heard him talking in his room and then heard another voice answer him. It wasn't loud, but not enough to make out words. Enough to know there were two. When I opened the door, he was asleep on his side facing the wall. And I told his mom the next day, and she got this look on her face like she was trying very hard not to react. She asked me one question. Did he get out of bed? I said no, and she looked relieved. The third time, he was sitting up in bed with his eyes closed when I checked on him. Actually sitting up, hands in his lap, smiling. He said, "Don't stand by the closet." I asked why, and he said, still with his eyes closed, because she likes teeth. His parents still left him with me after that, which I now think is insane, but at the same time, I think I told myself if they were his parents and they weren't panicking, maybe there was some medical explanation I just didn't understand. And one night I got there and his dad's face looked scratched, thin lines down one cheek, and I didn't want to ask, and he didn't offer me an explanation either. By then, Noah had started drawing pictures constantly. Not kid scribbles either, the same thing over and over. A dark shape in a hallway, a bed, a little figure standing on the mattress. One time he drew a mouth with nothing around it and colored the inside black. I found one under the couch cushion while he was in the bathroom, and on the back he had written in uneven little kid letters, "She comes out bigger when I sleep." That was the last week I babysat there. The final night was bad from the second the parents left. Noah wouldn't look at me while I was making him dinner, and he kept glancing down the hall toward his bedroom and asking what time it was. At one point he said, "If I fall asleep before they get home, don't let her open me." I asked what that meant, and he shrugged and said, "That's just what she says." I almost called his parents right then, and I really should have. I got him into bed around 9:30, but he was terrified, like shaking, holding onto my arm, begging me to leave the lamp on, not just the nightlight. And I left his bedside lamp on and the bedroom door open a crack. At around 11, I heard him in there talking again. Not laughing this time, but arguing. I heard him say, "No, she isn't sleeping in here." I went upstairs and stood outside the door listening, and I could hear him breathing hard. Then he said, much quieter, "She can hear you now." I pushed the door open. Noah was standing barefoot on top of his bed, not jumping, just standing there facing the ceiling. And his smile was so wide I actually backed up without meaning to. His eyes were open, but not focused on me at all. He looked almost feverish. His lips were dry and stretched, and there was spit on his chin where it had run down. He slowly raised one arm and pointed at the closet. And from inside the closet, something said my name. It wasn't loud, just my name, in a woman's voice close to the door. I ran. I grabbed my keys, left every light in the house on, and called his parents from my car. I was crying so hard they could barely understand me. They came back in maybe 15 minutes, but I refused to go back inside while I waited. His dad went in first, and then his mom. When they came out, Noah was wrapped in a blanket and looked half asleep. His mother asked me very quietly if the closet voice had sounded like her, and I said no. And that was apparently the right answer because she started crying. I never babysat there again. My aunt got very angry with me over it because she thought I was being dramatic and hurting someone's reputation. I didn't care. I'd rather have no money than ever go back in that house. A year later, I saw Noah's mom at the grocery store, and she looked exhausted. I almost pretended not to see her, but she came up to me. She just said, "He's better in the daytime now." That was all. I still think about that sentence more than I want to. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. My grandfather was a medium, and in the province where my family lived in the Philippines, people respected him, but understandably so, they were also afraid of him. See, my grandfather could see things nobody else could. Things like spirits and shadows, people who were deceased, and he had let on that apparently he wanted me to see them too. But I didn't grow up knowing all of this about my grandfather. When I was young, to me, my grandfather was just this quiet and strange man. He burned candles at odd hours, whispered prayers under his breath, and sometimes stared into empty corners of the rooms in a trance-like state, like someone was standing there talking to him. What I found out later was that when I was a baby, he performed some sort of ritual on me, and according to him, opened my third eye. I didn't find out about this particular detail until I was 12, and by then, it was apparently too late for anything to be done to reverse what had already been set in motion. I was in elementary school at the time, and one afternoon, me and my friends were hanging around the playground after class. The sky was gray, and the air smelled like rain and dirt from a nearby field, and my friends eventually ran off to the canteen to buy snacks, leaving me sitting alone near the swing set. That's when I saw her. A tall woman who was slowly walking past the playground. Her skin was unnaturally pale, and she had long black hair that hung down almost to her waist. She wore a white dress that was stained with mud along the bottom of its edges, as if she had walked through the wet soil of that nearby field to get here. And the one thing that really struck and stuck with me was how calm she looked, just walking past me slowly, completely at peace. I didn't see a reason to pay her any more mind, but after that day, I started seeing her everywhere, standing in corners, at the edge of hallways, on the other side of windows, always watching me, never speaking, standing perfectly still. There were other times I'd turn around suddenly and catch her at the end of a hallway before she would disappear behind a wall. One night, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone. My room was completely dark except for the dim light from my screen, and outside I could hear insects chirping and dogs barking from afar. I was just about to fall asleep to the familiar sounds when suddenly I hear one that wasn't so familiar. I heard breathing. Heavy breathing. Right beside my shoulder. Every hair on my body stood up, and I slowly turned my head, uncertain of what I would find there, and as soon as my eyes were positioned just so, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The breathing had been there, and whatever accompanied it had been there too, but in a split second they were both gone. I forced myself to sleep, under the guise that I must be overly exhausted, but sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning I woke up and immediately knew something was wrong. My room was unnaturally freezing, and when I tried to look around and catch my bearings, there she was. In the corner of my room, her neck was bent sideways at an impossible angle, standing completely still in the darkness. Her hair covered most of her face, but I could still see one eye staring directly at me through the strands. Desperately trying to grasp at any semblance of normalcy, my mind fought to come up with a solution, and what it landed on was blaming my cousin, who had a bit of a habit to play tricks on me. And so I said out loud, "Geraldine, stop it please, I'm trying to sleep." But the woman didn't answer. She just slowly nodded her head with this stiff and audibly cracking movement. Then she turned and walked out through the curtained doorway of my room. The next morning, I casually made a joke to my cousin about her prank the night before, and she looked genuinely confused, said she had been out, and that she had returned just that morning. My grandfather, who had been quietly drinking coffee nearby, suddenly looked at me and said, "I felt something in the house last night. Something that wasn't human." I'm assuming at this point he had some sort of realization, because as he was saying all of this to me, his expression went from surprise to horrified. I started crying immediately because I didn't understand what was happening, and that's when he told me everything. Me being a baby and the ritual and about opening my third eye. He said that I had the gift, but I didn't feel gifted. I didn't want this. I felt cursed. And from then on, it only got worse. The next night, I woke up around the same time, and this time, I smelled her before I saw her. Something damp and rotten, like wet soil after heavy rain. And I looked to place the stench, and there she was, standing right beside my bed this time. Her face was hidden behind her hair again, but I could hear her whispering over and over again. At first I couldn't understand, but then I made out the words. Her voice sounded almost as if she were crying underwater, but I was able to make out the repetitions. My child. I shut my eyes and pretended to be sleeping until morning. The next day, my grandfather took me to my school, even though it was a Sunday, and nobody else was there. It felt different. I felt like something was weighing on me. He walked me to a line of mango trees and stopped at one near the playground. His face changed, and quietly he said, "A mother and her child died here," and then started recounting their story. He told me years ago a butcher murdered his wife and child right there on the school grounds because he believed his wife was a witch. Then my grandfather looked at me and said, "She followed you because your spirit feels calm to her." Maybe he meant for it to calm me, but all I felt like doing was throwing up. My grandfather performed some kind of ritual beneath the tree. Candles, oils, prayers whispered in a language I don't understand, and after that the woman disappeared. For years, I didn't experience anything else, and I thought it was over until I turned 16. One night, I was alone in my grandparents' house while they were away visiting relatives. Their house was an old house, raised on stilts with bamboo floors and wooden walls that would creak constantly at night. Around midnight, I went into the kitchen, and that's when I noticed the house go silent, and then I heard it. A woman crying, soft at first, but then suddenly she was laughing. Not normal laughter. This deep, choking, unnatural sound, and just as I was trying to piece some information together, I heard a whisper. My name, very slowly, right beneath me. I looked down through the gaps in the bamboo floor and saw a woman staring up at me from underneath the house. Her eyes were wide, her mouth stretched into this horrifying smile, and she started whispering my name over and over while crying and laughing at the same time. I immediately started praying, "Hail Mary, full of grace," but then she started praying too, repeating the prayer with me, matching my voice exactly, mocking me. Every word I said she repeated underneath those floorboards. I began reciting my own prayer, not one from memory, and then everything stopped. She was gone. And when my grandparents returned around 1 a.m, I told them everything, and they were both deeply disturbed. And that's when my grandfather grasped the severity of the situation. He made the decision to close my third eye permanently, but in Filipino culture, something like that comes with a very heavy price. The ritual was performed, and my grandfather passed away not long after that. We moved away, and my grandmother will not let me go back to visit his grave. She says that whatever had been with me that night might be waiting for me to return.
What would you do if your friend started acting weird after visiting a haunted museum, and then you wake up one night to the sound of matches striking in the dark? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about someone who says that they wish they never went to that haunted museum. A few years ago, my friend Riley and I went to a haunted museum while we were out of town for the weekend. Most of it felt creepy in a fun way at first. It was just old funeral photos and cursed objects, glass cases full of things people said were haunted, and of course we were nervous, but still laughing. Then we were taken down to the basement. A staff member told us the basement held the museum's most dangerous exhibit. He said one object had been sealed away after people claimed they heard it whispering to them, smelled smoke after seeing it, and brought home something they could never get rid of. And at the end of the room, inside a glass case, was this doll. It was small and old, and it had a yellow dress, thin hair that stuck flat against its head, and one eye a little lower than the other. But the worst part was how it looked. Wet. Not shiny, but wet, like it had been pulled from black water and set upright behind the glass. The staff member told us not to touch the case and not to speak directly to it. I laughed because it sounded ridiculous, but Riley didn't. She stepped closer and just stared at it. I told her we should go, and she didn't answer me at first. Then she said really softly, "It's looking at me." I told her it was a doll, but when I looked back at the case, my stomach dropped. Its head was tilted slightly more than before. Not much, but just enough. I grabbed Riley's arm and pulled her away. She came with me, but she kept looking back over her shoulder at it until we were out of the basement. After that, something about her changed. She stayed with me for a few days after the trip because she didn't want to go home alone, and at first I thought she was just shaken up. But then she stopped sleeping. Or at least that's what she told me. She'd sit in the dark for hours. She barely ate, and she kept asking if I smelled smoke. A few times I caught her whispering to herself in the spare room. And when I asked who she was talking to, she'd just stare at me like she didn't understand the question. One night I woke up because I heard a soft sound coming from the spare room. At first I thought it was a lighter. And then I realized it was a match striking. Over and over. That little dry scratch. Then another, and then another. I got up and went to check on her, and the spare room was dark except for the brief little bursts of orange each time the match lit. Riley was hunched in the corner of the room with her back to me, just crouched there on the floor, striking match after match after match. I whispered her name, and she stopped. For a second, everything went quiet, and then she turned toward me, holding a lit match up near her face. The light hit her eyes first. She looked exhausted, skin pale, and she had dark circles under her eyes, but the worst part was her expression. She looked calm, and then she said, "She likes it better when I make the room feel like downstairs." I didn't even know what to say to that. I asked her what she meant, and she just smiled a little and let the match burn all the way down to her fingers without flinching. The next day, the whole house smelled like smoke. And after that, things got worse, fast. She started keeping all the lights off in the spare room. I'd hear whispering in there late at night, low enough that I couldn't make out the words. And twice I found burned matches lined up on the windowsill. Once I opened the door and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the closet like she was listening to someone inside it. I asked if she wanted to call somebody, and she looked at me and said, "It didn't stay in the basement." A couple nights later, the fire alarm went off. I ran out of my room and saw smoke already pushing down the hallway from the spare room. I started screaming for Riley and threw the door open. The curtains were burning, and the carpet near the bed was already blackened, and Riley was sitting on the floor in the middle of it, perfectly still, staring into the corner with this awful little smile on her face. I dragged her out while coughing so hard I thought I was going to pass out. And she fought me at first, not hard, but enough that I knew she didn't want to leave that room. The fire department got there fast enough to keep the whole house from going up. But Riley was gone before the sun came up. She wasn't in the house, and she wasn't outside, and she wouldn't answer her phone. The police found her the next day in the basement of an abandoned building a few blocks away, sitting on the floor in the dark. No burns and no smoke in her lungs. There was nothing that explained anything. Her eyes were fixed on the far corner of the room, and in one hand she was holding a single burnt match. I called the museum after that because I wanted answers. I wanted somebody to tell me what the doll was and why Riley came back like that. They told me they had no doll matching that description. Then they told me visitors were never taken into the basement. I tried to move on after that. I really did. Then last week, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard the same sound again. A match striking in the dark. Just once, from the corner of my bedroom. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Snacks in hand, the vibe is set, and once I start, don't eat too much because you gotta stay. Become one bestie is. Yeah. See, this time I made you say the fine part. Anyway, hey bestie, I missed you. What you doing? Oh, it's snack time, right? Yeah, go get something. Not a snack, get your gardening essentials. You know when you see my face, you gotta take a little break from whatever life got you doing. On to the story. Can someone please tell me why when I record, it does that little mute thing at like the first 0.2 seconds? That irritates my soul so bad. Okay, I'm gonna get on to the story, I promise. For the sake of this story, let's call this lady Mia. Mia has a 3-year-old son. Let's call him Gio. Gio is like an extremely smart kid. He catches on to things very fast. He is very advanced. He's always been advanced ever since he was born. So just to give you an idea of what Gio is like. So Gio has this best friend from school. Let's call him Leo. Leo and Gio are inseparable. They play together. They sit together. Teachers have to separate them. They both come home talking about each other every day. So eventually the parents got together and they started having play dates and actually building a relationship. And so both these families are actually like getting really close. Almost every weekend, one is at the other's house having a play date to the point where they were having sleepovers and everything. It was amazing for the moms because they can just like chill in the backyard, have a glass of wine while the kids are playing, you know, and everything was good. Everything was great for like the first school year. And then into the second school year, it was still great. But then Gio's mom, what did we call her? Mia, started to notice some little tiny red flags, but she didn't want to jump into conclusions. Now, when I say tiny red flags, Leo's mom compares them a lot, right? Now, I told you Gio is a very smart little boy. Leo was also a smart little boy, but he was like smart for his pace. Like Gio was definitely advanced and Leo was where he was supposed to be. So into the second school year, Gio had to actually switch class because the class that he was in now no longer fit his brain. So he had to be in a higher class. And Leo's mom, I should probably stop making the name so similar. I'm going to confuse myself. Leo's mom was really bummed about it. And at first, Mia was like, yeah, like I'm bummed too, you know, like they're bummed. I mean, I don't really care, but, you know, she understood because the boys are literally besties. She just chopped it off as, you know, she's mad because they're besties. That's where the change really started, was when he switched classes. Because he then has harder homeworks. He then has like more stuff to do. So usually sometimes after school, if they're over there at Leo's mom's house, you know, she used to be helping them with their homework and stuff. But now Gio's coming home saying Leo's mom doesn't want to help him anymore. And obviously Mia's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm sure that's not what happened. So she happened to mention it to Leo's mom, and Leo's mom was just like, oh no, it's nothing like that. I just was very busy, so I had my husband help him. And so she was like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. These are one of the first few red flags. Now fast forward, Leo's mom started to like cancel on play dates and say, oh, they have stuff to do. But then Mia would drive past their house and they would be home. So why are you like capping, you know? So about like a week goes past where behavior is just being so weird. Playdates are getting canceled. She's ignoring phone calls. She seems like she got an attitude. And Mia's not understanding like what's happening, but like she don't really care that much either. She really just cares because that's literally her son's best friend. And out of nowhere, she gets a phone call from Leo's mom saying, oh my gosh, I want to plan the best sleepover for them. And she's like, that's odd. You was just ignoring me and lying about it and stuff. Now you want to have like a sleepover? And she said that to her, not in those words, but she was just like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, you've been distant. I wasn't sure if, you know. She's like, oh, no, girl, I'm sorry. I've just been like super busy, you know, mom life, wife life. But let's do it. Let's have the sleepover. And when she was on the phone, she was on speaker. And so Gio heard, and Gio was like, oh my God, yes, I want to see my best friend. It's been so long. Yes, a sleepover. She's on the phone saying how she's going to get a pizza. They're getting a new trampoline. At that point, mom don't even got a choice no more, you know? So boom, they get ready for the sleepover. She sends him over there. Everything goes well. She picks him up. He had lots of fun. He ate lots of pizza. He had a blast. I should also say that Mia is a prayer warrior, okay? So the day that he came back, that night, Gio's in his room, Mia's in her room with her husband, and all of a sudden she wakes up in the middle of the night for no reason. And of course, it's around 3 a.m. Y'all know what I be telling y'all when you randomly wake up around 3 a.m. for no reason. Anyway, she randomly wakes up. She goes to use the bathroom. She gets a glass of water. She tries to go back to sleep, but she can't. So she checks on, Gio. Gio's asleep. So she goes back to bed, and she's now just scrolling on TikTok. And as she's scrolling on TikTok for about 10 minutes, she hears this. And of course, she's like, what the fuck? What the fuck is that? Thinking it's Gio knocking on her room door. So she goes to open the door, but nobody's there. So she's like, what the fuck? Let me go check on Gio. So she goes to Gio's room, and Gio is standing in his room against the wall, banging his head against the wall. But when she looks closer, his eyes are closed. So he's probably just sleepwalking. So she's like, oh my God, you scared me, boy. Let's get you back to bed. So she leads him back to bed, and he stays asleep. And that happened. Weird. Odd. But she didn't really think nothing of it, right? Until the very next night, it happened again. She wakes up randomly at 3 a.m. About 30 minutes after she wakes up, there's the knock again. She goes to Gio's room. He's banging his head against the wall. What the fuck is that? This is new. Immediately, her discernment is going off the charts. But she doesn't want to jump to conclusions. And so she calls his doctor. She tells his doctor, the past 2 nights he's been waking up banging his head against the wall. Should I be worried? His doctor, of course, says, oh, sleepwalking, it happens sometimes, especially for kids his age. And she already kind of knew that the doctor was going to say that. So she's like, all right, whatever. Gio proceeds to do this every single night for the next week. Not only did he proceed to do that, it seems like Gio's getting dumber. I'm trying to be funny. These were her exact words. She's like, it seems like my son was getting dumber. He's struggling with his homework. His teacher is calling me, saying how he's falling asleep in class and he's not focusing. And he can't do things that usually is like a piece of cake to him. Again, Mia's a prayer warrior. And she's looking at the pattern, and he only started acting like this after that sleepover. And that sleepover came out of nowhere after she started, she was ignoring her. Then she's remembering the first couple of red flags that kind of gives are you jealous of my son? So that following Sunday, she went straight to the pastor, told the pastor everything that's happening, told the pastor that she thinks it's that lady. Pastor was like, yeah, it definitely sounds like, something like that. And guess what the pastor told her to do? Fast. Pastor, of course, took Gio, prayed over him, The entire church prayed for Gio. Mom did a 7-day fast. She was not fucking around. I tell you, she was wrapping that boy in prayer. After that 7-day fast, Gio got sick. Now, when I say sick, it's not super sick. It seems like he has a cold. The cold is only coughing, a headache, and a fever. However, the cold only lasted for about 3 days. Within those 3 days, it seems like Gio was sleeping for 3 days straight. He didn't even go to school. However, after the 3 days, he was back to normal, if not even better. Gio's back to his little self, his little smart, advanced self. Teachers are also telling her, Gio's back to normal, he's good. However, after that, upon seeing Leo's mom at school, she now is fully an enemy. She sees her and is rolling her eyes. Leo tries to go say hi to Gio, and she's snatching Leo away from Gio. He is like, oh, so I wasn't wrong, bitch. It was you. And about a month later, Leo just completely stopped coming to school, for the rest of the year. Come to find out from, one of the, teachers. Leo's parents had to abruptly bring him back to their country. I'm not going to say where both of those families are from because y'all like to pin people against each other. They both, of course, lived in the U.S., but they're not from there. So yeah, that's the story, y'all. Don't forget to let me know what you was eating in the comments. Don't forget to purchase your book. Don't forget to go subscribe to my YouTube for the long form videos. Okay, I love you. Bye.